on this computer.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. We're just getting everybody signed in, and then we'll get started in just a minute here. I'm going to put all the guests on mute. Don't take us. All right. And we'll give it just one more minute, and then we're going to get started. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I appreciate everybody making the time this morning. Hopefully you'll find this helpful. Really, the goal here is really just to simplify what has become pretty overwhelming and sometimes quite frustrating topic. Walk you guys through how you should be looking at your next steps and strategies for how to use tools that are available to you to identify which might have but by all means, we want to keep this as in. If there's something you'd like me to go deeper on, please don't. If you've got a burning question kind of while we're discussing chat, we'll do our best to manage both. So with that, we'll get started. We've been around for just over 20 years, and we are about 60 employees spread across two small and medium-sized businesses ranging anywhere from 5 employees up to about 2,500 employees. Our core purpose is to make IT fun, and that's part of the demystify what can sometimes be an overwhelming topic. And we've done this across lots of platforms, from looking at AI to topics like cybersecurity, to even things like looking at how we're leveraging technology to train our employees. These are very powerful tools, and this is an exciting time where technology is changing very quickly, but our job is to try to make it as accessible, as approachable, as unintimidating as possible so that you as business owners and business leaders can understand it, but then also as your end users and employees can take advantage of it to be more functional at their jobs and save time. Our company is broken into 4 departments. We have our on-demand support, our security and compliance experts, our strategists, and our business automation specialists. And then we have our team of product managers who oversees the technical projects that we do. All right, so with kind of the intro out of the way, let's talk about why we're here. As I mentioned kind of just a moment ago, there are so many different types of cyber threats that face organization. And for each threat, there's 2 or 3 tools that you can get that are designed to help you stay safe and protect you from that particular attack. And at times, that can be a little overwhelming. So what we want to do today is to try to help you navigate that, give you some best practices and next steps, and help you understand kind of how we look at this on behalf of our clients, but also on our behalf of our own business. So just by way of on the internet, every 60 seconds. And if you just think about this for a second, and you can look at any one of these. So, right, 156 million emails are sent every minute. Tumblr, which I didn't even know was still a thing, 25,000 posts. Pick some of the more, common things. There's 120 new accounts created on LinkedIn every second. Dropbox, you've got 800,000 files being uploaded every second. And then if you look at some of the content one, we've got 400 hours of videos being played every second on YouTube, or uploaded, I'm sorry, and about 700,000 being watched every second. It's just an insane amount of activity. And that's really what kind of the point of this is, just to understand how much is constantly going on online. And why that is so important is because each of these events, each of these things is a potential value and risk to your organization. Your staff need technology to be able to do their jobs. And more, they need more technology. More and more, they are, used to be you could just block YouTube. Nobody needs to watch videos at work. But now we're using YouTube for all kinds of educational purposes and for all kinds of promotional purposes. It used to be that we could even block some social media accounts. Oftentimes, that's not feasible anymore. LinkedIn has become kind of the yellow pages or of business and is an incredibly important tool with a lot of value, especially to sales departments. However, these are also risks. They're risks of organizational data, proprietary data getting out. They're risks of other types of information that can lead to attacks getting out. And in some cases, they're risks in that the very tools themselves could be embedded with viruses, with attack vectors, or other things that could threaten the organization. And avoid it. We can't just put our head in the sand and block the internet, as much fun as that would be. And so, really, what we're here today to do is to try to understand how does an organization take a posture against cybersecurity that's appropriate for their size organization and the industry that they're in. So before I go any further, I want to give you guys just a little bit of some context around kind of where cyber stands today. It's constantly changing and what we're seeing changes. So I want to give you a little bit of a snapshot of just kind of where we're seeing the world of small business cyber right now. So this gives you a sense of kind of the day in the life of cybersecurity experts and kind of what we're looking at, what we're paying attention to. There are still a tremendous amount of email attacks. This is probably the number one attack vector that we're dealing with. And those email attacks are getting increasingly sophisticated to the points. On top of that, we are seeing just so much data be exchanged over the internet that it's becoming harder and harder to differentiate between malicious data, malicious attacks, and valuable data because more and more organizations are opening up their networks. They've got 2 or 3 products in the cloud now spread out all over the globe. And so, whereas it used to be, there was an office with computers and servers in it, and all we needed to do was keep the bad people out of that office. Now, people are everywhere, data is everywhere, the applications that you guys are using are everywhere. And so, we have to look at it very differently than the way that we used to look at it and the way that we used to protect clients. And that's great in so many ways. This has allowed us to function at an entirely different level as businesses. We can have a distributed workforce. When there's a labor crunch, we can hire anywhere. We can take advantage of offshore labor when that's applicable or valuable. There's so many advantages to this for our clients that we definitely want to embrace it and support it. This is the future and this is where things are headed. But we need to be smarter about how we protect the business, and we need to use entirely different tools and strategies than we used to use in the past. This is some predictions around where cybercrime is going. And one of the ways that we measure cybercrime is what damage is it doing to the US economy. And these are measured now in trillions. We were measuring this in billions up until about 2020, and then we converted from billions to trillions because the numbers just got so large. And when we say trillions of dollars, what is that? It's everything from the protection side, which is a significant portion of it, but a much, much more significant portion of it is the damage side. These are the ransomware attacks, the businesses going out of business, the businesses facing penalties and fines, businesses having to do all kinds of remediation work after an attack. There is just so much money being spent to prevent, but then in a much larger way, spent to deal with the impacts and kind of ramifications of cybercrime going on just in the United States. This is just in our own economy. And so when we look at this and we kind of ask, where is this coming from? Why is this getting so out of hand? A lot of it has to do with the fact that these criminals are still operating with a pretty high amount of immunity. Most of the attacks are coming from Ukraine, from Russia, from portions of South Africa, and from portions of South America. These are countries where the US has almost no influence, no jurisdiction, no ability to extradite criminals or even prosecute criminals. And so as a result, the criminals in those countries can operate with a fair amount of immunity because they know that their government is not going to come after them, oftentimes because these are jobs that are creating revenue for the local tax system, sometimes because there's politicians on the take in a corrupted sense, and they know that US relations are such that the US is not going to be allowed to come in and do anything about it. And so it makes it really easy for them to operate and attack the US because they know that they can operate without having to really hide in secret. So they don't have to go through huge efforts and lots of work to hide themselves. They can operate kind of in plain sight, knowing that the US can't do a whole lot about it, but that the US are great targets and victims for these types of attacks. And so that's not good news. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. There's been a lot of pressure put on the US government to try to crack down on this. And despite a lot of lofty speeches and kind of strongly worded letters, there's been no teeth. There's nothing that the US seems to be willing to do to actually go after these countries and truly enforce this. And until we see some sort of strong action on the US part or some sort of international treaty that is designed to create sanctions around this, I don't think we're going to see any short-term change in the number of attacks going up and the damage that's being done. Insurance in a minute, because insurance can be great. I think it's a necessary part of your strategy. Add to insurance. criminals know that there is easily gone after if they know they're insured and they know that businesses are going to get an attack is that much more likely. And so they're getting smarter and smarter about who they go after. If I go after a business with the max amount of money that business can pay, if I go after a business insured, I know that I'm going to be able to have insurance company pay a return. Jackie's saying there's audio. Just give me 1 second. Let me see if I can switch. How does that sound? Does that sound any better? Casey's saying good. Okay.
I don't think it was your audio. It was just going in and out.
Okay. Yeah. Let me know. Let me know if I start breaking up again. I appreciate that. So yeah, where I'm going with this is as businesses start to get hackers to come after them because they know that their claims are much larger. And so there's definitely kind of a catch-22 with that. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the insurance portion of this presentation. I'm assuming most of this is not going to be unfamiliar to you guys. Ransomware is somewhere that's worth paying attention to, which is historically ransomware was to sell you access to unlock your data. That's the type of attack that we're seeing is scenarios where their network and then offering to basically sell it back to you is a pretty scary thing because whereas we pay these ransoms in scenarios where hackers are able to might help our business get back up and running, but they're not going to prevent the threat of the hacker releasing that data to the very concerned about. And it requires a very different type of response and protection to work against that. They're still embedded with malware that are collecting data about people when they put them on their phones or tablets, and even some applications that are being installed collecting a lot of data on you that can then be later used for attacks or packaged and sold. The top most reported crime, even today, it was definitely true in 2020. We're seeing the phishing attacks just become so much more intelligent and so much more successful as a result. And so that's a real threat that we're paying really close attention to. Kind of getting into people's networks. Stalkerware, similar to malware, is still very popular, and social is continuing to be a threat to organizations. And I think social engineering is the one that maybe has the power of AI. Social engineering has always been a threat. In training, we can decipher it pretty easily. However, with powering of deep fake videos created, the voice recognition and everything that sounds just like the hearing has a whole different bend to it now that really has the potential to. So I think that's the one that we're maybe paying the closest attention to is one that we're going to need to really understand better. And as that can, how they can protect themselves from it. So these are some types of attacks that we're still seeing. And I think one thing that we want to make sure businesses understand, especially those of you who are on this call today, is just knowing that small businesses are not exempt from these types of attacks. Instead, small businesses are often the targets. Small businesses, especially successful organizations, are right in the sweet spot of they have enough assets to go after, especially if those assets are insured, but their level of sophistication and security is still a business that has something worth stealing, but doesn't have the defenses that are going to be totally adequate to protect against that theft. And so from that standpoint, they are one of the most common targeted organizations, and especially businesses that have a longer track record, have been around for a little while, have good community presence, have strong support, and the amount of data, they use all kinds of sophisticated information, the same as like your Salesforce would use to target prospects. These hackers, these organizations are companies with hundreds of employees, and they have entire departments that do research on the types of organizations that would make good targets. They're pulling lists, they're downloading data, they're scraping your website, they're looking at your social media, they're looking at a lot of things to figure out who would be the right targets to go after. And in some cases, the organizations who are doing that research or hack organization, in some cases, these attacks involved in them, one that might have found the target, one that might have found the attack. It's more and more common that these really sit lots of employees within each of those players. So this is somewhere in a dark, remote town, hacking into your network, sophisticated, large operations, and they have the ability to pull all kinds of information about your organization. So finally, just to kind of wrap up this context piece seeing as of like the last 6 months. So one of the most common ones that we're seeing is the routing or rerouting or intercepting of wire transfers. And typically the way this attack plays out is somebody gets into either your email system or the email system of one of your vendors. It could be either side of a transaction. And what they're looking for is they're going to try to get into like a CFO, an accounting manager. They're going to get into a mailbox for somebody who typically handles payments to vendors. And then what they're going to do is they're going to create a rule that looks for any email that involves the word invoice, billing, account, routing, payment. They basically create these rules that are going to send them an alert the second there's an email being exchanged that may involve a payment. they're then going to monitor that email communication. So they're going to watch the email go back and forth, and they're looking for the perfect moment. So maybe it's, hey, we can do that. It's going to cost $25,000. The customer says, yeah, that's transfer. The customer says, great, what's your information? And then that's the moment they're going to interject themselves. And what they're going to do is they're going to look for the email that would have been sent, find the actual PDF wiring instructions. They're going to download a copy of that. They're going to edit it to change the information so the bank account number is their information, and they're going to send that on to whomever's responsible for making the payment. The person making the payment is going to get an email in the chain of emails that they've been exchanging with all the threads and all the conversation history there, on a letterhead from the customer that looks completely authentic and normal, because it is. The only thing that's been changed is the banking information. And then they're going to make the payment. And of course, that payment's going to go to the wrong place. We're seeing this happen with such frequency and so much repetition that it is becoming probably the number one threat that we see, because businesses still these days are relying on ACH and wire transfers, especially as a lot of businesses during COVID got off of paper checks because those were deemed to be either unsafe from a security standpoint or unsafe from a health standpoint. Or they didn't. A lot of businesses have gone to electronic payments, and there's a lot of advantages to electronic payments. But one vulnerability is the ability for a hacker to intersect that communication and interject themselves and then steal that payment. The second is we are still seeing a lot of ransomware. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing this new variant of ransomware where it used to be the data never left the network, which was great for two reasons. One, as long as we had good backups, we could just restore. And two, we didn't have to worry about filing any breach notifications with the Attorney General, with any of your customers. We didn't have to disclose anything because no data had left the network. And most of the privacy laws say as long as data doesn't leave the network, we don't need to notify anybody. The one exception is HIPAA. But with that exception aside, it really does change the risk portfolio to the business if the data doesn't leave the network. The new types of ransomware attacks are showing that data is leaving the network or onto the dark web or somewhere else if you don't pay the ransom. And the goal is obviously to increase the chances that you pay the ransom because you don't want to deal with the ramifications of that. The third is credential harvesting, and this is still a very big business. Typically, what it looks like is they're going to send out some kind of a phishing email that's going to say something like, hey, I have a secure file I need you to open up. Can you take a look at this? And there's going to be a link you click on, and it's going to bring you to a login page for either Dropbox or very commonly 365, sometimes Google Drive. You're going to type in your username and your password to open up a secure document. And it's got a secure document transfer program. So does Dropbox, so does Google. And it looks very, very similar to the real one. But in this case, what it's doing is it's just capturing your username and your password that you're typing in. And in some cases, if you're providing an MFA token, it's also capturing that. Then what it's doing is it's immediately having a bot log into your mailbox as you and sending out the exact same attack to everybody who you've ever sent an email to. So it scrapes your sent items folder, figures out anybody you've ever emailed, and it sends the exact same email to all of those people. And what happens is when you get an email from somebody who you trust, who does email you, and it's coming from their legitimate email address, the chances of you clicking on it are much higher than if it comes from a suspicious email address. So the success rate of these are very good. And what happens is they go from breaching one mailbox to 30 to 300 to 3,000 to 30,000, get into more mailboxes and then run the attack more mailboxes. The size of the attack is bigger. And typically what they're doing is they're running this over like a 12-hour period, scraping a ton of accounts, and then flipping those and selling them on the dark web for some amount of money, usually $2 to $5 per account. So they can sell this data to hackers that then want to use it to commit some other attack on your business. And hackers will buy these in bulk, and then they'll run bots on them and try to catch anybody who has not yet changed their password since the attack happened. And then the final one we're still seeing with a high frequency is payroll theft. And the way this works is your HR department gets an email from somebody who works there saying, I need to change my direct deposit information. I got a new bank, or my wife. Here is the form to fill out for direct deposit. The hacker fills out the direct deposit form, puts in their hacker's bank account information, submits it back to HR, and HR logs into your HR system, Paychex, ADP, whoever it is, and changes the direct deposit information so that the checks now start going to this new account. It takes a while before the employee realizes they haven't been paid. The employee goes to HR and says, hey, I haven't got my paycheck. HR says, well, I sent it to a new bank account. And then we figure out in that moment that, hey, it turns out it wasn't actually the employee who asked to have the direct deposit changed. When an employee is reaching out to HR, they're not necessarily going to do so from their company email address. It's more acceptable and normal that might come from a Gmail address or from a Hotmail address or a Yahoo address. And so the hackers can take advantage of that. They create a fake account using that employee's name with Gmail or Yahoo or whomever. They send the email. It comes from, Delcy Bean, delcy@gmail.com. Your payroll HR person, everything is normal until they find out it wasn't. And so this is kind of an annoying one, and one that we really have to educate HR departments around creating policies around how do you verify direct deposit changes, and how do you reach out to employees and confirm that they actually did make one, and confirm not using the email address that they supplied, but using some other methodology of contacting that employee, giving them a call, emailing them with their company address, something else to verify that that direct deposit was valid. So those are the 4 common attacks. There are others the remainder of today. So I think what I hear a lot from clients that I speak to, and I know that our account managers hear from clients, is it just can feel overwhelming. It can feel like there's just too many things coming at them from too many directions. They don't know where to focus their energy or time. On top of this, they're also having to deal with all the other IT costs of replacing equipment, investing in software, trying to figure out whether to be cloud or on-prem, trying to figure out all the other technologies they can do. There's a ton of pressure to implement AI and automation. There's just so much coming at you that sometimes also it can get expensive. There is no end to the number of checks you can write to invest in IT, from preventing cybersecurity, but then to all those other things I just mentioned. There's a never-ending pool of things you can buy, and you're never completely there. And every time you've bought in the latest thing, there's some new thing, some new technology, some new great, latest, amazing thing. And while that's exciting and it means so many opportunities for businesses, it can also feel a little overwhelming of like, at the end of the day, we still have to make money. We still have to have a bottom line. We still have to generate a profit. How do I know where to invest, how to manage that risk portfolio, how much of this? And ultimately, I think this is a formula that we're all very familiar with, which is where's that relationship, that balance between price and value? How do I make sure the things that I'm going to spend money on, that I'm going to allocate IT budget on, are going to be the best and highest value? Ideally, I want that value to be greater than the cost so that I am making the best investments possible. And how do I make that determination? So that's really what we want to get into today, is walking you through the process that we have found to be really successful in helping business navigate this is to do. Or we need to start by defining your risk. And this sounds really kind of simple or maybe obvious, but you'd be amazed how few businesses take the time to really sit down and figure out what is the risk to us. And when we talk about risk, what we want to think about is what's the worst possible scenario? What's the hacker takes control of your network and totally shuts down the business? Is it they get into your steal proprietary information, either patents or D contract? Like, do you have really sensitive data? You are a medical office with a lot of patients, or you're a B2C company with a lot that would want to be stolen by a hacker. We need to figure out where your greatest risk is. And every business is going to have multiple risks, but the better we can understand your greatest risks, where your organization has the greatest amount to lose, the better we can design your defense strategy. If we're just trying to protect against every possible attack and every possible threat, it's going to be a little bit of like an inch wide and a mile deep. I'm sorry, a mile wide and an inch deep. What we really want to do is be a little more strategic than that. If we know that you guys have to keep $30 million in your bank accounts to process transactions, we need to focus on that $30 million. That's where all of our defense strategy, or at least a lot of our defense strategy, needs to be centered around. And then what's left, we can spend allocating across some of the other hand. Your bank account never has more than $100,000 in it, and that the real jewels to your organization is your data, and we need to protect the data. Then we need to look at where does that data live, how are we accessing it, what are the rules around it, and we need to build our strategy around that. So I really can't, I can't value just how important it is that we figure out what is the greatest threat to your specific business. What would be the worst possible thing that could happen from an IT cyber standpoint? And how do we work backwards from that and figure out how to protect you from that threat? I can tell you for our business, the absolute worst possible thing that could happen would be a hacker gets into the tool that we use to manage our clients' networks. If a hacker got into that tool, they would have the ability to remotely hack all of our clients' networks. That would be absolutely devastating for us and for our clients. So when we look at our cyber defense strategy, that's where we put most of our investment, is how do we protect that tool? How do we minimize the risk of that one event happening? And then we take what's left and we look at the other risks that we have, and we kind of spread our chits around to kind of cover those losses as well. Once you've done that, the next step in the process is to assess the risk. And we look at this as kind of a 4-quadrant exercise. On the one axis, you have severity of impact. How bad would it be if this happened? On the other axis, you have the likelihood of it happening. And so if we kind of create a 4-quadrant, and on one axis, we have very little impact, barely wouldn't even notice it, to huge impact, could destroy the business and potentially worse. And then on the other axis, we have how likely is this to happen? And how from very, very likely, this is a high risk, to this is probably not going to happen. This is a very, very low probability. If we can create that matrix, we can then take a look at the types of attacks your business would face, and we can put them into those quadrants today based on your current defense strategy. So you can say, okay, the worst possible thing that can happen is this data is lost. And based on your current defense strategy, we'd put that at like a moderate probability. And then we can go through the other types of attacks that your business could face, and we can put each of those attacks into one of these quadrants where we can understand what's the risk portfolio. Is it high risk, meaning it's highly likely and highly damaging? Or is it low risk because the impact is huge, but the risk of it happening is very, very low? Or is it the risk is high, but the impact is very low? The better we can understand this, the better we can understand what the risk portfolio is for your business, the better we can then define the right strategy. From there, we try to minimize as much risk as possible, and we're going to focus on that quadrant that's going to have the highest impact and the highest probability. Those are the things that we need to go after. The things that are going to represent the highest risk to your organization are where we should be investing most of your IT investment. From there, we want to look at the other high impact items that maybe have a lower probability, but still would have a devastating impact on the business, and kind of work our way down. Where we don't need spending a lot of money are the low impact, low probability events. That's where we should be saving money, is if it's not going to have a huge impact and the probability is low, let's not put a lot of IT security around that or a lot of investment around that. Let's make sure we're deliberately putting the investments where it's going to have the best return for the organization in terms of either probability of attack or impact to the business if it happens. From there, we develop what we call a continuous improvement plan. You are never going to solve this problem because the problem is constantly changing. And I will tell you, it is the greatest cat and mouse game ever invented. Because on the one hand, every time a hacker develops a new technology, a new threat to a business, a lot of people are reacting to that. These cybersecurity companies are developing new tools and strategies to protect it, and insurance companies are figuring out ways to carve that out of their risk portfolio so that if it happens that their insurance premium or their insurance risk is minimized. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, the hackers are responding to the response. So as Microsoft creates a new patch, as Sentinel-1 comes up with a new detection methodology, as some new cyber startup creates a new AI tool to detect that type of attack, the hackers then respond. And because the dollar amounts are so huge, we're talking about so much money at risk, then what can happen is very quickly the hackers can spend the money needed to develop new attacks, new ways to get around that. And so it's this never-ending cycle. And that's why you need to think of this as a continuous improvement cycle. You basically want to figure out, where are we today? What are we doing today? And what are the things that we're going to continue to do over time? What's our investment strategy? How are we going to continue to mitigate this risk? And what are the ongoing activities and practices that we're going to put in place? And those practices have to be aligned with that defense strategy in terms of what's the biggest risk to your organization between impact and probability. And those things have to change, or can change rather. So the probability could go from low to high if new technology comes out to increase the likelihood of somebody getting through your defenses. And that's where that continuous refresh and looking at this is so important. And then I mentioned that insurance plays a piece in this. At the end of the day, what we want to do is figure out what risk can we reasonably mitigate and what's left. And then we want to ensure what's left. And again, we want to focus that insurance on the highest probability, highest impact items. It is getting harder and harder, virtually impossible, to just get incredibly broad cyber insurance that's going to cover any kind of cyber attack. These policies have gone from being a page and a half to 2 pages to now being 25, 30. We saw one that was 80 pages long the other day. And these 80-page policies are full of exemptions and exclusions and specific coverages and very, very limited specific coverage on very particular types of events, and then all kinds of granular exceptions to that. It's happening because the insurance companies were upside down on this. They were giving out premiums for $2,500 a year and paying out $5 million in coverage and claims. And so that doesn't work. That math is never going to add up. And so the insurance companies have responded by writing much more specific policies with lots of restrictions and lots of kind of guidance around that. And so you still need insurance, but you're not going to be able to just say, hey, let's just buy cyber to cover everything. So what we want to do is, just like with our cyber defense strategy, we want to focus our cyber insurance strategy on that risk portfolio that is unique to your business. We want to be able to go to your insurance broker and say, look, this is the thing we need to prevent. We need to make sure that nobody can get into our system go into our online banking system, access the funds in our current banking account, transfer those funds out of our banking account into a different account. And if that happens, we need to know that we're insured, and we need to be insured up to X dollar amount because we routinely have X dollar amount in those bank accounts. And again, there's a lot we can do to mitigate that risk from a cyber standpoint. But if it's your biggest risk, if it's the thing that most threatens your organization, we want to make sure we're supplementing whatever we're doing with some insurance to provide that last mile coverage to get whatever is going to slip through the cracks of cyber, because cyber is never the magic bullet. There's always going to be a zero-day attack. There's always going to be a once in a million perfect storm where somebody finds a way to break through the system that exists today, especially with quantum computing just around the corner, especially with the AI deepfakes that we're seeing. There's going to be somebody who figures out how to get past the 3-step wire verification process that you put in place that your bank said is perfect. Somebody's going to be able to call your bank, sound just like you, and say, yes, I authorize this transaction. You can go ahead and pay the thing out. And they're going to be like, okay, great. Thanks for calling, Bob. And they're going to go ahead and release the money. So because that is still risky, we need to find that last bit of protection from insurance. And that's an important piece of your strategy. But you got to focus the insurance where it's going to have the greatest impact, because you can't insure everything. And then step 6, the last step in the process, is monitor and track progress. It's really important that you have a system to kind of keep an eye on how you're doing. If these are our greatest threats, how are we doing at protecting against them? What's the current risk? How have we addressed that through insurance and through cyber defense? And what have we reduced that risk portfolio to? What's our exposure remaining? Maybe you have $30 million in the bank. The insurance company gave you coverage for $25 million. And we're doing our very best to protect it from a cyber defense standpoint. So your total exposure is $5 million. And maybe you're okay with that. Maybe you're comfortable with that amount of risk. But we need to constantly manage and monitor that, and be having ongoing conversations around where do we stand today? How are we aligned? You know, as much as I hate this analogy, it's a little bit like you guys are generals and you're in war. These are war times. These are, you know, foreign entities coming after your business, and you are really the generals calling the shots, devising the strategy, deciding how to respond. And just like a general in wartime, you have to constantly be reassessing your position and seeing, okay, where are we at? What kind of progress are we making? Did all those things get done? Sometimes we started these processes, we don't fully implement them. We had a great initiative to get everybody to sign MFA, but did everybody actually do it? Have we checked in to confirm that every single user absolutely has MFA turned on? Have we made any exceptions to that policy? If so, what were the exceptions? Why did we make them? This is an ongoing conversation, and it's one that I get CEOs, business managers. It's not one that you want to spend a lot of time on because it doesn't feel like it's moving the business forward. It doesn't feel nearly as exciting as talking about automation or AI in terms of making the business run more efficiently or be more successful. But it is a critical part of your day. It's a critical part of the role of a CEO, a business manager, an ops manager. It has to be on your radar, and it's got to be part of the agenda of your quarterly meetings, of your annual meetings. There's got to be a piece of the strategic leadership's agenda where you're talking about, okay, how are we doing on cyber defenses? Because we're at war. We can't deny that. We are at war. And what are we doing to keep ourselves safe, to protect our employees, to protect our customers, to protect the data that we have, and to make sure that we stay in business and that we don't go out of business because some hacker gets into our system and puts everything that we've created, everything we're working for, at risk. And it feels invisible if, you know, this is threat you cannot see that could potentially take down your whole business, but it is really, really important. So I want to transition now, and we're going to talk about some of the technologies that are out there, and I'll kind of talk through which ones may have different use case to different businesses. So first is EDR. This is considered, I think, one of the most important things you can do. We've got as far as making it mandatory. We've built it into all of our contracts. We don't have any clients who don't have some form of EDR at play. And EDR is going to monitor your computers for bad behavior. This is the evolution of antivirus. If you're still just running off of traditional antivirus, it's not doing much. Viruses are not how hackers get into your network anymore, because viruses are easily defeated by antivirus. So hackers aren't going to spend a lot of time creating viruses. What they're going to build are very sophisticated attacks that involve scripts running on your computer and people getting into your computers and using that to steal data, encrypt data, transfer data off of your network, steal trade secrets. And they're not going to do that using a traditional virus. They're going to use it using much more sophisticated types of attacks. So first, you need a software that's going to be able to detect that. And second, this is really important, that software needs to be monitored 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because the attacks are going to come at 2 a.m. on a Friday. That's when on a Saturday. They love to attack right when the weekend's starting, when everybody's kind of got their guard down, when everybody's out of the office not paying attention, because it gives them the longest window before they're going to get noticed Monday morning, 8 o'clock when you show back up to work. you need this software working around the clock, and you need somebody paying attention and watching it at all hours of the day. We've talked to companies where they have this set up, but it's going to some mailbox that's checked by some employee, and that employee is not watching that mailbox 24 hours a day, 365 days a week. That employee has to sleep. And while that employee is sleeping, that is when the hacker is going after that system, and their mailbox is filling up with all kinds of alerts and logs, but they're not going to see them until it's too late. You really need live human beings watching this at all hours of the day in order to do this right, because otherwise all you're doing is documenting the attack, but documenting the attack is not nearly as helpful as stopping the attack. And that's where those logs have to be monitored. The next is when hackers are not trying to go after your device, they're going after your email box. They're either trying to get into your mailbox, they're trying to send out phishing emails, they're trying to send out spoofing emails, they're trying to engineer new deep fake attacks. There's a lot of good information in somebody's email, and there's an implicit trust system when you get an email from somebody you recognize, especially somebody in your own organization. And so we really have to look at that mailbox. And how do we make sure that nobody who's not supposed to be there can get into that mailbox? Nobody can create forwarding rules to send email out of that mailbox. Nobody can be running software in that mailbox that's automatically doing things like sending out emails. And we need to really look at the email communication going back and forth if I have in place to detect whether that email actually came from the person it says it came from. There's a lot of different approaches to this. It's a very multifaceted thing, but email security is a huge piece of your strategy. Again, depending on what your risk profile is, but email is often a way to get into somebody's network, no matter where the risk is. It's just a matter of figuring out where they're going to go from there. And that's where that risk portfolio really comes in handy. The next, and this ought to be kind of just generally accepted at this point, but everybody needs MFA on everything. And we say MFA, multi-factor authentication. These are getting better and better. You're noticing more and more websites start to ask you if you want to use like Windows Hello as your MFA tool. And Windows Hello is going to use a biometric piece of data. They're going to use either facial recognition or fingerprint, not just a text message. More and more man-in-the-middle attacks where they convince somebody to give them the code or they find a way to bypass it. So we want to be careful that we're not over-reliant just on 6-digit codes. And so the MFA is getting more and more sophisticated. Biometrics is great. Another one is Microsoft's tool. Now, instead of just asking you to enter code, the number, and then you have to go back to the tool and enter the number to confirm that it's the same. And that's a way of just kind of bypassing somebody just clicking approve without thinking about it. So there's more and more sophisticated, but at a minimum, you've got MFA is on everything. It's important. If something has risk to you, it's the strongest form of MFA available for technology. If it's a bank, kinds of sophisticated, turn on an application, then it's a matter of looking at that. But really just looking at what's going to be the best way to protect that tool or software. Right, I'm just going to close one thing and see if that the audio. Give me one sec. How does that sound? Good. Jackie say, all right. Let's see. We'll try it. All right. Does that sound okay? Maybe. We'll see. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. All right. Next couple of things I just want to run through. Having a tool to manage your secure passwords is really important. What we find is if employees don't have a tool to store passwords, they're going to use bad passwords. If you give them a tool that allows them to have more complex passwords that they don't have to remember, they're much more likely to use complex passwords. So you can't just tell your employees, we want you to have a different web password for every tool that you use. We want the password to be randomly generated. Those are all the best practices. But if you don't get a tool to store those passwords, they have no way of doing that. How are you going to possibly remember 12 different passwords that are each 14 characters long that have random letters and numbers and characters? Like that's not practical or reasonable. And so having some sort of a tool to store those passwords is vital. And then the other thing that's vital is having a tool to share passwords that need to be shared. So if you need to have, let's say to like our Amazon account, we need 5 people to log into it. They all need the same password because we want to have one Amazon account, not 5. Great, that makes sense. So the way we do that is we create a tool that allows us to store that shared password and then share it with other people. Somebody leaves the organization, we can remove their access to that password so that they no longer have access to that Amazon account after they leave the company. It also allows us to use a secure password, not a generic password like the name of our company, and just give that to everybody. We've done entire webinars about this, but a huge investment for a lot of businesses is going to be around training and testing their employees. And there's a lot of different technology you can use to do this. This is one that you definitely want to have on your radar and be paying attention to. And again, you got to go back to that risk profile, but based on what your risk profile is, if it is an employee, somebody into the business, give access to their password, falling for attack, then we really need to build, not only do training, but build around that risk profile. Look at your risk profile and figure out where are you most vulnerable, and then training and testing around that. As I mentioned earlier, if you have somebody in your company who's handling direct deposit, we need to train that HR professional on how to do basically debunk potentially fraud direct deposit changes. And then there's a whole series of alerting. And this is an area that I often see businesses underinvest in. If a business comes to us and says the greatest threat to organization is somebody into this folder, in this folder, we have very, very confidential data that is very proprietary that we can't ever let anybody into. What we want to do is alerting that goes off anytime anybody accesses that folder, so that we can know and have a log of every time somebody goes in there, and maybe even share that log with somebody in the business who can verify each of those activities is actually accurate. So maybe you get a weekly summary from Microsoft that says, here's everybody who accessed the SharePoint file. You can skim that and yeah, it looks like that looks right. That looks right. Why was Bob in there? And I keep picking on Bob because he's on my screen, but why was Bob in there at 2 a.m. from a California IP address? That doesn't look right to me. I'm going to call Bob and ask if that was really Bob. And Bob's going to say, yeah, that was me. I was on vacation. I needed to look this thing up. Okay, great, fine. Or no, I don't recognize that. That wasn't me. I'm in California. Okay, I need to send off an alert. And so it is just an alert, like a hacker's in your network. Sometimes we just want to look at the things that are most important and look for any odd behavior. And this is where that risk profile is so important, because we can't look at everything. You can't monitor every file in your network and send your report for every time everybody accesses any file. Nobody in the world has time to go through that and look for the anomalies. We can use some AI to do a little bit of that, but it's much more valuable if we can get specific and granular. Where's the risk of the business? Let's build the most comprehensive alerting possible for that risk. And let's make sure we know about any time that data is accessed, transferred, copied, downloaded, anything, so that we can really understand how do we prevent that and lock that down. The next, and this is one that I think not enough businesses understand, but you need to know what exists on the dark web that relates to your business. If you're not familiar with the dark web, we use this kind of iceberg analogy sometimes. The tip of the iceberg, the part we can see, is the kind of internet that you browse using a search engine. Then there's a deep web, and this is where information is held online, but it's securely protected, and you can't just browse it, but like we can create sharing links and we can exchange data. There's ways of getting data on the internet that is protected and secure. And it's usually done through private lists that people are sharing to each other. Then there's the dark web. The dark web is not easy to browse unless you have the right tools and know how to do it. And this is where basically anything that is illegal is happening on the internet. This is where everything from human trafficking to selling drugs to selling cybersecurity attacks, either the vectors, the data, any aspect of it is going to be exchanged, stolen, traded, exposed. And the dark web is not easy to be, to just browse and keep an eye on. You can't just have a Google alert for things that happen on the dark web. But you need to know what is happening on the dark web that correlates to your business. And there's tools you can subscribe to that basically will monitor your presence on the dark web. If somebody anywhere is posting anything related to your organization, your IP addresses, your employees' email addresses, it's going to create an alert in real time and say, on this forum, somebody just posted that they're selling credentials, and in the list of credentials they're selling, 3 of them are employees of your company. That's really, really important information to know about, because we need to know what's out there. It's very hard to defend against a threat that we can't see. And so this brings light to it. We know what's out there, we know what's being exposed, and we know how to respond to that in accordance. Another one that people aren't as familiar with is this idea of log aggregation. Oftentimes, when there's an attack, we're constantly trying to figure out what happened, what was stolen, was anything transferred off the network, what did the hacker access, what did they get into, and very often, the way we do that is we look at logs. And looking at logs is about the most unsexy thing in the world. It's just looking through hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lines of data. But what we often find is that businesses don't have the right logs and that enable us to actually tell them what happened. And there's two problems with logs. Either they're decentralized, meaning they're all over the place and we have to look in a million different places, like on every single individual computer. If we have to go through every single computer on your network and you've got 300 computers, we're not going to be able to, in any kind of efficient manner, find anything valuable. It's a very manual process. The second is the logs aren't retained long enough. Many businesses are only retaining logs for sometimes as little as 1 day, 5 days, 30 days is kind of a common default. But in many cases, these attacks took months to implement, and the attacker's been in the network for 3-4 months. If the logs only go back 30 days at most, then we don't have the information we need to see when they got into the network, how they got into the network, and what they did when they got into the network. So log aggregation tools for businesses that this fits their risk profile, this will be a very valuable tool. And what it does is it collects all the logs from all the devices, puts them into one search panel, retains them for a very long period of time, usually 90 days, could be a year, and then allows us to search those logs. So we can just type in a keyword like an IP address of a hacker or a name of the hacker's computer, and it's going to search across hundreds, thousands of devices and millions of logs to show us any reference to that, which is going to help us figure out exactly what happened. This is really, really critical in helping you determine if an incident was a breach, and a breach is when data left the network. And that's really important from a legal and compliance standpoint, especially for certain industries. So log aggregation can be a really powerful tool. And then finally, the last one I'm going to share with you before we run out of time here is just really thinking about and being careful about what you share online. There is a growing risk to businesses in just the way that they give out information that can be used in attacks against them. We see this by them having high resolution copies of their logo on the internet that any hacker can download and then use to create documents that have a high resolution version of your logo on it. We see this by organizations publishing way too much information on social media. Like every time they hire somebody, they post the person's name and all their contact information. And then sure enough, hackers are going to contact that person and go after them because they know they're new. They know they don't know the rules yet. And they're going to try them to do things like buy gift cards or transfer money or do things they shouldn't do. They're going to look for things like your company is going on an event or retreat, and they're going to use that as a way to know that people are out of the office and defenses might be low. They will use whatever you publish. And so there's a really important line to understand. How can we still have the presence that we want to have online, but do so in a secure, protected way? And we could probably spend 2 hours on that topic alone, but it's a good one to start to mull over and be thinking around is just put yourselves in the position of, if I was trying to do bad to my company, what could I find out about my company by not being an employee? Just by going online, looking at Facebook, LinkedIn, our website, Googling us, what could I find that might be useful information? And start to look at that and scrutinize it and see, do we need to publish that? Is there a different way to publish it? There's a new way to publish images in a version that can't be downloaded. They're called SVG files. And if you put a high resolution of your logo up in an SVG file, a hacker can't simply right click and download that image, then put it on a PDF and make an invoice with your logo on it. So there are sophisticated ways and things you can do to minimize your risk here. But this is another one that there's no one piece of technology, but it is part of your strategy that you want to be looking at and thinking about in terms of where's our risk here, what can we do to minimize it, and how can we kind of mitigate that. So I know that's a lot to throw at you guys, especially this early on a Tuesday morning. But I kind of wanted to just walk you through the landscape of what we're seeing and start to get those gears turning for you. From here, obviously, we're here to help. One of the most common ways that we can work with you is do that risk assessment. Where's your greatest risk to the organization? And then do that 4-quadrant exercise of, for those risks, how probable are they and how impactful are they? We can then look at your current defense strategy to mitigate those particular risks that are in that high probability, high impact quadrant, or in the lower probability, but still high impact quadrant. See what you're doing, And then prioritize the findings. Say, okay, based on what we found, these are the 4 things you really need to be doing. This is top of the list. This is next year. This is right after that. And then we want to implement and maintain. And then we want to reassess either every year, every other year, every 18 months. There needs to be some sort of reassessment program in place where we are revisiting this and re-looking at it because technology and cyber threats are changing constantly. So if that sounds helpful, that's something we can help you with, feel free to reach out. We know this is a confusing, overwhelming topic. And as I mentioned earlier, our job is to try to simplify this as much as possible, to try to make it as accessible as possible. So we don't want you to feel overwhelmed. We want you to feel educated. And the more educated you feel, hopefully the more empowered you feel and the better decisions you can make for your organization. But we're happy to do the heavy lifting. We're happy to do our best to kind of see around the corners and know the path and do our best to lead you guys and keep you safe. So with that, I know we are right at time. I'm happy to stick around if there are any questions, but I do want to just thank everybody for tuning in. I apologize for the audio issues. I'll have to figure out what's going on there. I guess I have to open up a ticket and have somebody take a look at my computer to see what's going on. But I appreciate it nonetheless. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer them. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you guys again, and we'll publish this recording in case you want to rewatch it or share it with anyone else. Have a good day.